Welcome back to Beyond Stereo, the Dolby Atmos podcast. I'm Dan Bucknell, and here we talk about the world of immersive technologies aimed at creating a more meaningful and emotional experience for music, film, and just about everything else. Today, I'm joined by audio engineer Dr. Mike Trubetskov.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I wanted to just get you to introduce yourself first and, tell us how you got started with this whole, music thing.
Well, I started with the music thing since I was 5. I'm Dr. Mike Trubetskov. I've been full-time in the industry for a few years. I've been professionally in the industry, recording heavy bands, scoring, producing since 2015. So that's what I do for my living. This is my passion. This is everything my life is about: music, heavy music, film music, epic music. So I started as a piano player when I was 5. Picked up a guitar when I was 15, back home in Russia. I moved to Australia. I started my production business, slowly learning and growing. And this unfolded to where I am at the moment, I guess.
That's awesome. Yeah. And look, I know you've talked about this a little bit before, but I wanted to just get like the full story of that, because I know you started off in a completely different area. And
yes.
So like what were you studying to be, and how did that change over time?
Okay.
Here's the full rundown.
Well, here is the deal. Because I originate from Russia, music field is not, I would say it's a bit more tricky in Russia to get a career in music rather than in Australia. In comparison, in Australia, it's also very tricky and very challenging, as you know, but in Russia, it's even more difficult and there are less opportunities, I believe. Right. So I never pursued music as a career up until I came here and realized that this is actually possible. So therefore, in Russia, I studied physics. So I'm a physicist by my education. And then I studied biophysics, so physics in application to biology, human body, human brains. And when I came here, I had a privilege to do a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, right? So I was offered a scholarship, and that was a path for my immigration into Australia.
Wow.
That's how things unfolded over time. And, there are some parallels with music and biology and interactions of motions and human brains, and music and human brains. I guess it's all interconnected, although seemingly there are not much of overlaps and similarities in my education. But I find it quite useful still to the day.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely can see, what similarities there might be between those, or the overlap. I guess the psychology of, what music does for us, with the emotionally, but also just like, in our day to day, we're always sort of looking for, like, what we talk about on this podcast is, that immersion, and not just Dolby Atmos, but everything, from, watching movies, listening to music, or even watching an ad, and what that can do is inspire us or make us feel nostalgic and things like that are really important. And I think that probably overlaps quite a lot. So what kind of overlaps are you talking about? And take me through that a little bit. What you sort of mean.
So to start off, though, the immersion is a topic that resonates with me so much, because I believe that music is one of the highest forms of human expression, and that also has existed since no music instruments have been invented. Like, you go into the nature, you can hear the sounds of wind and the ocean and birds singing, and that is music already. Right?
Absolutely.
Those fluctuations, those motions, it's a physical motion. Music is a oscillation of air of different frequencies, and all of that is different frequencies. Music is assembled. It's like an assembly of random movements into some kind of
pattern.
Movements that are orchestrated in some way. And that's what touches our soul so much. And to me, it's still a mystery how that works on such a deep level, but it's been always so fascinating to me. I guess that resonance between someone's oscillations put into the music form, and then a listener can have the perception of those oscillations is something that really drives me quite a lot.
Absolutely.
And talking about that, then, because I'm a physicist, I have studied a lot about the waves, the wave theory, the oscillations, and the resonances, and the movements, all those things, regardless of the application. Now, if we talk about mixing, those things come into play so much when you carve frequencies for each instrument in the mix. So that's one of the overlaps that has definitely been very helpful on my journey as a mixing engineer. As a producer, there are some overlaps for sure as well, but these are more subtle, I guess. When I studied biophysics and the brain and the body, it's also like it's a more holistic kind of perspective of how those energies reflect to our lives, I guess. So I would assume that there is a technical part of it, right? And as a physicist, I know in some kind of engineering, I know some kind of mathematics, some kind of physics, and that's all applicable to the technical side of things. Not as much, but at least it gave me the overall approaches to learn by myself, right? But on the other side, the creative thing and the psychological thing is more of a holistic perspective that I believe realizing how humans function helps a lot to understand how music can impact us immersively as well, as you mentioned.
Yes,
I like this parallel.
Oh, completely. Like that whole idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of, like a certain chord structure or even specific frequencies can do certain things, tuned to, down to we're talking like the atomic level, like we're really, really far down, and that's how, vibrations and things like that are happening. And then when that happens, I mean, I'm certainly not a physicist, but I have studied, on my own as well, a lot about that. And we've spoken about that probably before. But even like just the use of let's just go into the dimensions for a second, because I love that word and I love that idea. With music and how it talks to us in this way, that could be considered another dimension. It's above what is happening in a physical way, or it could be. If we're talking about like emotions, and that's all happening in the brain. However, we can have like sentience. Like we can explore things on an emotional level beyond what is possible in our physical world, and that translates into music because we can sort of. I'm sure you've heard this before. Like you could imagine something and then hear it in your mind's ear, if that's a thing, and then create that into the real world. So you've kind of imagined that. That's almost like a new dimension in itself to do that. Physics is everywhere, But like that's just one idea about it. But I love that the you're talking about waves and different things, and I mean all of that's very relevant as an audio engineer because we're talking about how to manipulate sound in its purest form of how sound moves within a space, which is all physics again. I've actually talked about this with my students. I do a lot of work for the council, the local council, just, basically working with youth and getting them into stuff like this. And we talk about, acoustics, and we're talking about, sound coming from all around you in Dolby Atmos and things like that, and how that works, why that is more immersive. And it's not just, it's not just about, it sounding cool. It's hitting us on a really deep level. So I think you touched on something really beautiful there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What resonated with me in this idea as well is your inner ear, as you thought, or like the ear in your mind.
Yes.
And to me, this is very important because as a composer or as a creative, sometimes you just go by on your day and you hear a melody, or you hear a guitar riff, or you hear a synth melody, or whatever, or chord progression.
Every day for me.
Right? And like, it's almost like a gate from another dimension, or from a connection to something higher than your just regular daily life, at least, like, no questions here, I guess. And then it's up to you. It's a choice whether you are able to have that, capture that, and translate that into something to not lose that idea, or not. So for me, I had to build a life around, well, being full-time in the studio, because otherwise those ideas just gone. You go by your 9 to 5 job, which is completely fine as well, and I've done that for many, many years. But those ideas, you just don't have the time to explore this fully. So you limit yourself. You have that threshold you cannot break through in order to explore what you are supposed to. Maybe not. I don't know. This is like a very philosophical kind of question, right? But capturing that, to me, is one of the most important tasks in my life. If those ideas come to me worthy capturing, most of them are. And losing them is something like, I've lost a few which were good, and it's hard to accept that. You know what I mean?
No, I totally do. And look, I think that's, the reason we created microphones and it was one to be heard in maybe a PA system or something like that. But I'm sure the main reason and why they're so amazing to pick up sound and record them, that's like the meaning behind all of it. And I think that's, taking just like, a video or a photograph. Those are meaningful because we're taking a moment in time and we're recording it so that we can reuse that later. And that moment now is infinite, whereas before it was finite, and that's like the whole point behind it.
That's right. That's
so
right.
That's really cool.
And every moment is different in this life, right? Even though it seems that things can be the same, everything is always different.
Yes.
So that it is so important to capture things the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think we're going into, recording world now. So if we take that turn into like, how you choose what something should be, people are always talking about the gear and, those sort of things like, which microphone, which preamp, which compressor you're going to use and what. And look, those things matter, but I don't think they matter anywhere near as much as the performance and the heart and the intention behind all of this.
Absolutely. I can tell you that I haven't upgraded my gear for a few years. I have some decently high-end preamps and decent microphones for sure, but I haven't touched that, and I haven't been on gear acquisition syndrome for a little while now, because I realized that my chain, there's nothing wrong with my chain for vocals or for guitars. It just works, it's fine. And now my job is to help musicians capture their best. So I'm coaching them more than I'm worrying about the sounds, even though I do for sure, and I spend the time. But the performance and their musical ideas matter much more at this day and age of high quality gear that we have at our disposal. No problem, right?
So completely agree.
Absolutely agree with this idea.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's an important one, because I think a lot of new engineers or people just exploring this for the first time, it's very easy to get caught up in all the equipment and stuff. I've definitely been guilty of that myself. And look, it's fun. Like, I'm a gearhead. I love gear. I love exploring it all and seeing what cool things do. But at the end of the day, none of that matters unless you have that other thing, which is the intention and the the performance and capturing that moment. A moment that matters and making it, be able to be clear and those sort of things. We're not talking about the gear doing that. We're talking about what was the intention? Did we capture the right emotion? Those things translate far beyond which microphone. You should definitely be working more towards getting those things right, more than which microphone, or piece of gear.
That's it.
So I think you're completely right there. So I want to take a little bit of a detour here. So obviously, this being the Dolby Atmos podcast, we talk a lot about immersion in so many different ways. And I did want to kind of quickly jump into, what have your experiences been, not just in Dolby Atmos, but creating music or projects that have the specific intention to immerse on purpose sort of way, right? What have you been doing? What is it that is immersive? Not just the format I'm talking like, what is it that makes you feel immersed to you?
Right. So to me, immersiveness means depth. And depth in music is created with a couple of ways, but I guess the opposite of depth is sort of flat mix or flat production that doesn't move much. There's not Nothing
So
wrong with
movement.
that either. I mean, unless it's not a goal. Let's say if we're talking about a thrash metal song, it's pretty static sometimes, has fast drums, fast guitars, doesn't change much just because of the genre definition. I can't quite call thrash metal immersive. Not at its core, at least, right?
Okay.
But we put it, like if we flip it, on the other hand, if we talking about heavy music that has subtle nuances around it, maybe there is a main vocal line, there's a hook, which is mirrored by some extra elements, maybe backing vocals, maybe some synths, which mirror that line. They don't necessarily have to come across forward, and the listener doesn't necessarily have to hear them, but they feel them, right? That creates depth, that creates that third dimension, and that actually creates subtleness. And to me, subtleness is something that people want to revisit for, because it creates more complexity and interest in the production. I'm not trying to trash thrash metal. I love the genre too, but it's just an example of something that doesn't quite aim for that immersiveness. It aims to crush you in the bones, and that's it. Immersiveness is, it also has dynamics and movement.
Dynamics, yes.
It has contrast from loud to quiet, from big to small. To me, modern metalcore is one of the examples, less orthodox examples, which can very much be defined as immersive heavy music. And then film scores is another whole genre of obvious application of immersiveness. Now, we're talking about some specifics of how one can achieve more immersive productions, regardless whether they aim for Dolby Atmos, whether they aim for film score, whether they aim for indie rock or EDM production. To me, like, the depth is achieved by having your main melody, a hook, and then adding something that can counterpoint that in a subtle way.
Right.
So you can also complement tones. Say you have a big fat synth up forward, which is your melody. You can do that same melody with another synth, which sounds warm and dark, and more reverb on that synth is placed. So immediately, rather than you have a static synth, you have depth now. You have your big synth, and then you have your deep something that creates atmosphere and just feeling in the mix. Another cool thing to do is you have that melody and you harmonize with it sometimes. Have a counterpoint harmony going on. And that immediately gives more interest to it. But then you can't quite tell whether it is going on or not. And so you want to revisit the song, therefore.
Yes,
I mean,
that's interesting.
Yeah. I guess this touches upon this idea as a start, at least.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, all of those things are really good examptions of that. Like, and there's so many, as you said. But
sorry.
I mean, like, yeah, some of those things I was thinking, like, I mean, you touched on dynamics and movement. I suppose the thing that is immersive is like, for me, like, if I think about like the technical reason for that, it's because nothing is the same coming from, wherever it's coming from. So the intention is different from one moment to the next, or from one place to the next.
Yeah, one section to the next.
And I think, if it's the same thing, like if you think about, like, I'm going to touch on Dolby Atmos here, but I'm actually trying to say something else, so bear with me.
Yeah.
Basically, in Dolby Atmos, we have, a lot of phantom standards. We've got lots of different, speakers around us. And essentially, what we're trying to do to create immersion is have something different happening in every speaker. And the difference between having one thing come out of every speaker and that would be the phase issues, right? And we can hear those and it just sounds wrong. So I suppose in the same sense, if you think of something as multidimensional or something that has change over, it could be time, it could be layers, but it's the fact that there is multiple of it, whatever this thing is we're talking about, and it is different from its counterpart. That is what the technical definition kind of is of immersion, really. So when you're talking about extra layers or, the same synth, but layered with a different sound, that's now the immersive thing. It's layering multiple things. I think that's what immersion technically is actually
Pretty
doing.
much.
And then I suppose, it's an interesting way to think about it, you know.
Yeah, here's my idea as well. Like in modern productions, especially in the modern productions that are, let's say, more hobbyist kind of productions, the sounds that people can get with freeware or cheap software, sometimes what they lack, even though they're high quality, they lack that movement. And so if you have that one line of a synth, you're trying to place it in different speakers on your Atmos mix or even in stereo, it doesn't have that movement within itself. It doesn't modulate. If we compare it with just a basic example, analog synth, you play that same line on analog synth, it will sound different every time, pleasantly different. If you layer that 5 times, you will have a weird psychoacoustical effect of flow.
Yes, because they're all different from each other.
It's exactly the same thing MIDI-wise, but it's different because there are subtle circuits within that synth that doing that thing.
Yes.
High-quality modern synths do similar thing as well. Drum samples come to mind as well. If you just use one-shot sample throughout the whole lot, it's static. Some people prefer that, but I like blending different ones so that there is that human dynamics as well. Program drums versus real drums. What's the difference? The difference is that the perception within every microphone capturing that drum kit is slightly different, slightly off, ever so slightly. The phase, the performance, compared to the perfect drums that are on the grid, perfectly phase aligned, it just doesn't have that much of a movement which we need for immersiveness.
Yeah, and it's actually called humanizing to fix that, make it more. Yeah, that's literally what it's called.
So
the fact
human
that
nature is immersive then.
That's
because
exactly
we have
what
the
I'm
depth.
saying. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's in nature, even with humans, immersion is part of our existence anyway. And when that's why it hits so hard, and when it's so cool, when it's captured in this way, using recordings. And I think it's because we're longing for it anyway. And when it does happen, we're like, oh, that's it. That's what we're looking for. Yep. So that's probably like it's like symbolic of the very thing that we already are, and what we're striving for. It kind of like aligns. So that's really cool. Yeah. So you are known for obviously the heavy music and metal guitars and things like that. How did you start getting into that world specifically? Because that's quite a niche, right? Like not just any music, but like in that world particularly. What was the what was the route for that?
So I started listening to heavy at the age of 13 when I discovered Muse and Rammstein.
Cool.
Back in Moscow. That quickly became my favorite kind of music, and I just personally enjoyed that a lot due to my personality, my life path, the surroundings, and all of that. How did I get into the music side of it is a bit more interesting because, well, when you start to listen to heavy music, you want to become a guitarist, right? You want to play that.
It's very guitar-heavy music, yeah.
Yeah, you want to drop your 6-string and play in drop. That's your first instinct. And so I did with an acoustic guitar and piezo pickup. Sounded like crap, still loved it. Then I got my first electric guitar when I was 15. Long story short, it never, you pick it up and it doesn't work. You just can't play it the way the records sound.
Right, of course.
Actually, this is the big point, because I think in order for me to achieve at least the quality that is somewhat close to those records I was enjoying, took me like 10 years or so. That's how much work is required in metal to refine it enough. But I was also young. Long story short, I took lessons for the guitar, joined bands, wrote my own music on and off. But then I guess the big milestone happened when I joined a band called Gift of Madness. We played some shows in Moscow, but then we hit a studio to record our debut album, right? And when that happened, I was working with a great engineer. His name is Arkady, back in Moscow. And he showed me how most of the recording process is aiming to polish up the details rather than the big picture. because the big picture was kind of there already, but the details of my performance weren't at a time. And so he showed me how I could do punch-ins, I could focus on small details, and how I could hear them, really.
Yeah.
Because before that, I couldn't hear what I was aiming for. After having that studio session, like 4 sessions or so for an album, I discovered what I was missing and what I needed in order to sound better. And I guess that was my turning point. After that, I realized I want to do this as much as I can. Came to Australia quickly after, bought my first pair of monitors, and started doing some mixing tutorials myself, learning, offering my services to friends, and just slowly building my skills up until today. I'm still learning.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say that as well. I mean, it feels like we never really stop learning, right? But But yeah, like particularly in this industry, like it sort of, there's this mentality of making it or not. And I mean, I had Jack the Bear on recently, and he was saying about making it as well, that it just never really happens. You know, it's not this magical time where it's like, oh, we've got everything now, and now we're whatever. We're always just continuing and grinding and learning, bettering ourselves, you know, as we go.
Right.
So that's
because
really cool.
It's also a movement. It's a trajectory. And if you stop moving, you're left behind, because this industry is so competitive, and you have to accept that you have to work very hard to deliver better and better for your clients, because having regular clients is a luxury. It's a privilege.
Absolutely.
So you have to match that. You have to make sure that your skill is constantly evolving, as it is with everyone else. Like all the records, all the heavy records that have been put out in the past couple of years are sounding better and better and better every time I listen to it. It's not like the industry has saturated. It's growing fast.
Absolutely.
You have to match it. You have to be on top of it. And if you're not, you're doing a disservice to your clients.
And
They're
yourself,
paying you money,
really.
hard-earned money. There's not much money in this industry. It's all their own pocket money, basically, and you have to deliver the absolute best. Otherwise, I just don't feel like I'm good enough for them, and I will never settle. If I do, it's just it's the end of it.
I suppose it's like you're always trying to like keep up in that way, but you're doing that by bettering yourself, and doing that is also like the best thing for your clients. So it's sort of always like, I mean, we can relate this to the psychology and stuff as well. You know, just good healthy routines and things like that are part of it, but then it's dedication to your craft in an ongoing way, not just sort of hitting a point where, oh, I've got what I got now and that's it, and we'll just stay here. And again, about the the dimensions and the the immersive quality of that, staying static and not evolving, it's exactly the same thing.
It's not immersive.
You got to keep moving. That's the way of life.
That's it.
I love that.
That's it.
That's so cool that came full circle like that.
There's another thing, like people can get comfortable and people can get burnt out in the industry. I'm burnt out right now. That's fine. I've been here many times. But when you are burnt out,
as long as you're taking care of yourself,
like you are tunnel vision, and sometimes you have to pull yourself out of it. You have to remind yourself why the hell you're doing this in the first place.
Yes.
And that's because of your passion for the music. And if you're passionate about it, you will put everything into it, regardless you're tired or not, regardless, like you will push yourself to 110% of your capability at this right moment, right? If you need time to refresh, that's fine. That's okay. But you cannot be lazy. You cannot become complain like.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, someone said that in quite a cool way. I use it all the time. It's basically saying, when finding the thing that you love or you're supposed to do, and those passions. A lot of people don't know what their passions are yet. The way I would say, how to tell what it is find something that even when it's hard, even when you're burnt out, you won't quit. That's the thing you should be pursuing, because it's, if you can do that, even when it's difficult, even when it pushes you down and it feels like this is impossible, but it's not going to break you even then. And you're just doing it because you love it indefinitely, whether you win or lose. Yeah, definitely keep doing that, and then you will eventually win. That's just always how it works. So it's but as long as you're taking care of yourself, though, like burnt out, we don't have burnouts. or try and minimize them, but it does happen, and it's important to give yourself a break as well.
Yeah. Hopefully coming soon.
I know how you feel. But like, make sure you are taking care of yourself. Like to you, Mike, but to everyone, that's a big part of it, because burnouts happen when we're forgetting to love ourselves a little bit and put the foot on the brake just for a moment.
Just for a moment,
and then keep it up. So I wanted to talk. I know we've got like 8 minutes on this one, and then we'll do another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we did a song together.
Yeah.
So you'd written something quite extraordinary, and I loved the hell out of it. It was called Victory.
Yeah.
And I think I mean you were showing me it because we were starting to talk about doing something together in the way of like scoring or mixing, some sort of thing. And look, we should get back into that because it was such a cool idea. But that whole thing was like you had this metal inspired orchestral vibe or score, that could be used for something epic, and I loved it. And then I was like, look, I got to mix that in Atmos. I just have to. So give me the steps. And then you gave me the multi-track and we did it. And I was, it was one of my earlier mixes now, but like, that was so fun. And like, I think, is it okay if we play it?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, I'll chuck it on now, and then,
thanks.
Yeah, we'll come back and have a chat about it. So that was Victory. How did you start with that? Like, what was the first inspiration for
That's an interesting
actually starting
one.
with that?
Okay. This can take a bit. I'll try to keep this brief, but this is inspired. So this is a sort of a reinvention of my metal track. It's called Victory as well. It has the same theme. I wrote it in 2020 on my lowest point. COVID hit. It was very difficult. And I wrote it as a song of hope for myself, and others as well, obviously, sharing that with everyone. But support to myself at the lowest state sort of thing.
That's beautiful, man. That's
I'm
good.
pretty proud of that metal version still, even though it's kind of old already. But the orchestral version, the film version, was a reinvention of that melody, which still hits hard. This whole song is based on that same melody, which is either sang by a singer in my metal track or performed on my synth in that orchestral version, which I wanted to sort of redo in a heavier, lower scale, a bit slower, a bit more epic, a bit more orchestral, so that it fits my cinematic portfolio. I wrote that track with Atmos in mind. That was one of my earlier Atmos scores as well. I consider myself, when I'm scoring, I score for Atmos specifically. And what I mean by that is I create layers with Atmos placements in mind. I know that if I create a stack of synths, I can have 5 or 6, and I know that they can go all around the listener. Or we can create stereo track for that pulsing synth, which will be jumping around in the Atmos field as an object, automated with that panning thing. Having that in the very early stage of production helps so much because, well, the same idea of producing with colors, with analog preamps, coloring your sound the way you want it, and having basically developing the vision before you hit the mix, so that when you do hit the mix, it's already dialed in. It's exactly the same with Atmos production. You have the vision, you have a placement in mind, and things just work because they were designed to be this way. Of course, you can make mistake, but if you have that direction in place before doing the actual mix, I believe that this makes that job so much easier. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because you have mixed that track.
Well, I mean, how I started with that track, because I did remember there was like a lot of tracks on that. There was a few, and that was awesome. And it's it's not uncommon, to have very dense sessions like for scores. But that one particularly, I think I don't remember exactly how many. Do you remember?
40 or 50.
Yeah, that's not that bad, but like really, that's a few tracks, for a song.
Quite a few though for an instrumental.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so the first place I think I started with that was I was just trying to find the main reoccurring melodies, I think, and usually I'm trying to put those in. Kind of the front is like the first stage we're feeling, particularly for a film, the front stage of your left, center, right. Still is very, very heavy, particularly because we're facing a screen usually and all those sort of things. So when mixing a score like that, I was like trying to find the things that were the core ingredients. And then everything else was scattered. And I definitely found pairs of things that were like, all right, so there's this, maybe 2 tracks for the guitars. And then there's a double of that. And I've got 2 tracks for those. And then there's another double of that. Yeah. And I'm sort of spreading them out that way.
That's it.
And again, because we have the layers. Back. Exactly. Yeah. So I had like the left, right, then I would have the sides and the rears. And I also tend to choose, this is more for the binaural, representation of this, that it works really well. But in general, I try to match tonally things that sound similar to the EQ shape of when things are around us in physical way anyway. So for example, if it's behind you, it's going to sound a bit darker. If it's to the side of you, it's quite bright, but because it's like right there. But at the same time, it's not as bright as the forward ones because, our ears are facing forward. So it's all those things I try to match. If a guitar or anything, a synth is a little bit darker sounding than another, I might put that in the rear or around you a little more than, the really bright ones. So the things like that, I found out quite a lot of cool things in that score. But it was just such a fun thing to do, like just to explore, because I could see how you were playing with that. And it was like really interesting. I could literally see it. Like when I'm listening to all these things, I remember doing it and going, wow, you've really put a lot of effort into having so many different groups of things. So I think that's different to trying to place something in Atmos that hasn't been designed for it. It's a bit of a different perspective for sure.
That's
a really cool thing. I think we're going to see more of that, because people are obviously Atmos is
more
very
experienced
much
now. Like, because I've done a couple of mixes in Atmos myself, and that was very important to understand how the process works and what you can do with that. And like having gone through that and then going back and writing with that in mind, I think that's a very, very important thing. Not many are aiming for, as far as I know, not that many, but I think there will be more of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess there's those two, styles of working in Atmos at the moment for music. One is where you do design it from the top, in Atmos, and then the stereo down mix of that becomes the stereo version, which people then master and release in stereo as well. Because stereo is still required as a deliverable, for Spotify and everywhere else, as well as the Atmos mix. And, but then there's the other way, which, we're cataloging previous things that were mixed in stereo and released. And then we remix those in Atmos, but they weren't ever intended for Atmos. It wasn't a thing yet, right? So there's kind of 2 ways of working, but I think it's going to be the other one first. From any time now, I guess people will start doing that more.
what are your thoughts on the technology catching up with the Atmos development? Because the advantages are obvious. It sounds better. It's more dynamic. It's like unfolding music into the space. And for anyone who has experienced the real Atmos in a real studio, it's a no-brainer. But for most people listening on headphones and binaural, it's not translating fully yet. So all the sound bars and the car audio having Atmos are good, but it's not at the point where it's widespread enough so that everyone could understand the value of Atmos. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this, and whether the technology will catch up, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, well, what I normally, attribute that to is a misconception that happens with what the intention of Atmos is. So people do sort of tend to think of it as, it's surround sound, or it's or in the same vein as that. But it really isn't. It actually fixes that problem. So the problem with surround sound was that you did need a surround sound playback system to play it back, right? And that whole thing required, when making and distributing that, you would need to sell a stereo version, a 5.1 version, a 7.1 version, and then an Atmos version, right? If you think that way. However, the whole point, I think, from a content creator, musician, filmmaker, anyone making this stuff, the reason why Atmos is still a no-brainer, I think, regardless of the end user, I think is because it's easier to drive one mix that will work everywhere.
Yes, for sure.
If done correctly. That's, I think, the distinction there. But if done correctly, then that mix is undeniably easier to promote. One thing, and it works everywhere. And that's kind of the reason why it's being pushed that much, rather than doing separate ones where you do have to sell different ones. And that whole thing, it's not necessarily about it being heard in all its glory in Dolby Atmos. While it can be, it's not the main point. And I think that's the thing. So, when people think, it's Dolby Atmos and I'm not getting the fullest version of that, that's okay. Whatever you have, it will work on. And that's kind of the point, you know, without having to buy a new version of that. So whatever you've already sunk money into, whether it's a soundbar or a car with it or not, like whatever, even stereo or binaural, if you're into that, the down mix is the same mix as the guy making the Dolby Atmos version. And that's the important thing. So you're kind of future-proofing. And I think that's the reason, because it's not actually about it being fully realized at home. It's about it not mattering if it is. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. But I think the technology will definitely continue to get better and better and to cheaper. Help with that. But the binaural, there's a lot of bad mixes out there that, when I say bad, I'm not talking it's a subjective thing, but there are a lot of music, on Apple Music and Tidal and all that is not as immersive as it could be, or it's still such a new thing that people can't quite get it right. So I think that's maybe the thing when people listen to an Atmos
people
mix
wanted to go for a trend, and people wanted to get the Dolby Atmos badge on their music rather than actually diving into the format and what it offers. That has distorted that early hype, if I may. Unfortunately, it's a shame. Because, with anything new, it happens, right? So I think
true.
it ebbs and flows, so it's
thing
fine.
That people are still learning how to do it, and that's like okay. But undeniably, what I've seen, particularly in the film industry, of course, but I think the same applies for music. People just haven't realized this yet. But there's and it's this could be a good thing or a bad thing, but the deliverable format encoding wise is the thing that is desirable the most. More than things flying over your head, more than whatever. It's the fold down being accessible that is interesting. So for a film, I've actually done mixes for films that were fully immersive, done everything in objects, and it's like doing a full immersive mix, and it's amazing. But then I've also done other ones that are really just 5.1, but in a Dolby Atmos container.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that's necessarily the best way to do it. It's just that you're using the encoding as the down mixable thing that can then be translated everywhere, even if it's only 5.1 inside of that.
Yeah.
People can use that, so it's still Dolby Atmos, to then have that one file that works everywhere. Obviously, that's done best and done better and only approved by labels if it's proper Atmos, but you can do that and still use the codec for its purposes. There's kind of still new ways to explore this. I think that would, if you did that, it would probably get rejected by a label or a distro service. However, for your own purposes, you could use that, like that MP4 file that holds the encoding. You could then play that 5.1 MP4 that you can make on the Dolby Atmos renderer. You could play that on a home system and listen to your song in 5.1 if you want. Like that's, do you know what I mean? So it's built into the thing that the metadata is retained. So that is the most valuable thing about Atmos, not the fact that there's so many more speakers, which I think people get wrong.
Yeah, so absolutely agreed. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you then about it all. So you said you've mixed a few songs in Atmos, and I know you go to Red Road Immersive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Awesome. So what's your experience been like mixing in the format then, and how does it differ from stereo? Like obviously it's a massive difference, but what's it been like for you?
So for a few things lately, Angus was the mixer. I was just accompanying, but I have mixed a few things in Red Road Dolby Atmos Studio as well. My experience, so I mixed film scores and I mixed some metals compositions as well. My experience was interesting. So there's a lot to unpack, but I guess
certainly
for me, an Atmos mix is, so you would separate. So let's put it back. When you're mixing in stereo, your production and your mix overlaps and infuses together.
Yes.
So by production, I mean choosing drum samples, using some guitar layers for reamping, using vocal effects like pitch, tuning to give that extra body to vocals, using that creative thing that really is a production thing for that mix, in order for that mix to come together in a stereo format, because it is so limiting. There's no space, literally. Like, you have to duck all the instruments, you have to compress so hard so that things pop and sound satisfying. Compression is another thing as well.
The two speakers that you have,
series of compression on your buses, on your subgroups, on your mix bus is a standard in stereo. Smashing things up, especially in modern metal, is a tone. If we bring it back, in Atmos, you have to deliver raw files, but you cannot bring your 146 tracks of raw files, like your snare bottom not cleaned up, your toms not cleaned up. You do that, you will spend days doing work which you should have done before. This is actually production work.
Yeah.
All the same with layering and guitars and all of that. Mixing in Atmos is somewhere, to me, somewhere in between doing stem mixing, it's not stem mixing, and raw multi-tracks. So you cook the tracks, you compress them, you carve them, you sculpt them, you EQ them, like your kicks, your snares.
Yes.
All of that has to be taken into a good shape before you hit Atmos. The tone has to be right, otherwise it's just a miss. Correct. What happens in Atmos then, though, literally, you can use dynamic EQ, and you can use your panner to set out things, and this is 90% of the work done. You don't need to, like, that's it.
Yeah, well, I think
this is one of the most fascinating things.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean the whole thing with Atmos is it's mainly talking about the placement of things, right?
That's it.
And the how that transfers down to stereo, I think that's why we spend a lot of time listening to the binaural and stereo versions of things. But you sort of got to make it work. It sounds good in immersive, but then when it folds down, it has to sort of still come back together. Whereas you don't have like a mix bus in Atmos, for example, and you can't do those things. But there are ways to achieve it. Still,
there are ways, but
different.
Don't need to.
Yeah, look, that's the thing. You've got more space, and that that dynamics is, you know, so much more. Like you have so much room to play because there's so many different places that aren't fighting for space now. Whereas in stereo, you've got to fit it all into the bandwidth of, you know, left and right and somewhere in between, which is just dual mono anyway. So it really is just two places to put it, you know, and then the perceived center. But that's not really a center channel. Adding even just the center channel, left, center, right, would be drastically different and separate those things, which is a good thing when you're putting dialogue there because you want it to be like that. But that separates it for a song. So there's so many things to think about when doing that. So I definitely see what you're saying. Like you're doing a lot of the groundwork of, you know, shaping tones and getting those things like compression and EQ. So it's actually the sound already, and you can do that in stereo, right? And then you take those multi-tracks and then just position them in Atmos.
Pretty much. And do some minor touches,
But I found it really interesting as well. I would love to get your take on this. When doing that position-wise, because remember Dolby Atmos uses like that that representation of our ears and how things sound different, perceivably darker behind us and all that. That also happens when we're positioning things. So because of that, you can actually shape EQ by moving it without touching an EQ. There's those things too, and everyone forgets about that.
Correct.
So like I found that, you know, putting a vocal just a tiny bit in the height, just a tiny bit, helps heaps to give it that, like, it's not even trying to elevate it. It's literally just trying to make more room without it sounding decorrelated from the rest of the mix.
Yeah.
And that is really,
exactly what I experienced too.
What did you,
Your pana works as an EQ. So the pana works as an EQ. Super important. Another thing is immersive reverbs. That's just blowing my mind, really.
Oh my God, yeah.
The reverbs that go into all the channels and go from front to back and all of that. This is like, I'm not an expert in that yet. I just used some presets which sounded phenomenal.
Yeah.
You need a lot of time working on that. That creates a big feeling of space, which is absolutely unachievable in stereo. That's one thing. Second thing is, well, obviously the pana, using objects for moving parts. That is what Atmos is known for the most. You can design those elements on the production stage. Your guitars, your synths, flying around, your delays, panning rapidly. Very cool. Actually, more simple thing to do.
Sometimes disorienting though, because like, I mean, there's that whole thing of like less is more, I guess. But I mean,
can be
people do talk about
untasteful.
Yeah, well, you got to be tasteful, exactly. And I think you know, with that whole thing where you have you might have objects moving around you, which is creating more depth in that sense, so it's not static. And then, you know, in other ways you have the layers, which is over the top of each other, but in different placements. So those are the two kind of big ones. But I wanted to talk to you about before. You were saying, you were talking about the idea of, I've actually forgotten. What were you just saying before? You were saying something really interesting about the, oh my God, I'm completely gone blank.
The production.
Oh, just a second ago before I started talking.
Oh.
I completely forget.
I did have a different idea though. I wanted to talk about dynamics.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I mean, I suppose with dynamics, you've got a lot more space again. Not just spatially,
one of
the volume.
Fascinating things that came across recently when I did a mix in Atmos. So Angus mixed it, and I obviously mixed it in stereo. And when I mixed it in stereo, my mix bus was crushed, right? As you do. When I brought it to Atmos, none of that existed. The mix, when Angus finished it, no mix bus compression, but it sounded more powerful, more compressed than my stereo mix, even though there was nothing going on the mix bus. And I don't think he added compression, if anything, maybe one channel, but nothing drastic at all. No drum bus compression, nothing like that. But
so we might be talking about perceived loudness and stuff now too. So when you have more things around you, I mean, it generally goes up in terms of, you know, how much energy is in the room, those kind of things too. So that's a really interesting one. Yeah, so you actually don't need to compress to get that feel.
Apparently.
And then when it does decorrelate, or correlates again, I guess in the down mix or the re-renders, it has this way, and it's built into the Atmos codec itself. Of putting it back in a way that is quite together. It doesn't feel like it's just broken apart still. You know what I mean? Like in Atmos, it just comes together beautifully. That down mix works really, really well. That relates to what I was thinking before. I remembered what it was. So play things like Pentio, upmixing tools, and Nugent and things like that. But then also the reverbs you were saying, like Liquid Sonics and stuff like that.
Yes.
These incredible, 916 reverbs and things like that have this cool way of making something that was maybe mono or stereo recorded and using real world acoustic anomalies of, different pre-delays and different, things to emulate massive rooms, like as if it was recorded with 15 speakers or 15 microphones. And it's amazing. It's amazing. So like what ones have you worked on or used? What did he have there?
We did use Paragon. We did use the Slapper. We did use, I think, Liquid Sonics. There were a few more. I can't remember the names.
One of those.
All the
Seventh Heaven, I think, is one.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So we used all the big ones, all the cool ones, and they all it's an interesting phenomenon where in your traditional mixing, you mostly use reverbs with a lot of color, like Lexicon 224 or 480, right? They have a lot of color. These are my go-tos. And also I use a lot of IR reverbs. Plates, rooms, they also have heaps of color. It's hard to find neutral-sounding reverbs. Sometimes you need that. But in Atmos, what I've found with those plugins, they're just incredibly high fidelity and more neutral sounding reverbs. They don't sound like a hole or a plate or anything like that. They just sound like a big perceived kind of space. They don't color the sound too much. They have different durations, different lengths. We also used FabFilter Pro R2.
Yeah, that
was
great.
Really good in Atmos. Yeah. So it's interesting to find, and I find those reverbs sounding a bit more modern because they don't have that color, and that's really desirable these days. But that's also hard to find in the stereo mixing world. So I believe that reverbs are a big factor in Atmos that sets it apart.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, that I wonder how, I haven't done much work in this yet, but with those reverbs, how they scale down. So what an immersive reverb sounds like in stereo. Maybe it would sound more dense, like how we're used to the old ones.
I think it would be. I think it would be, and that's. I think it would be, and I think it gives that color back. And so with the down mixes, another thing I wanted to bring up is Atmos mixes sound incredible most of the time, but and binaural sound pretty good as well. But when you down mix from Atmos to stereo, it doesn't always sound as good. It sounds a bit more muddy sometimes, unless we didn't spend the time optimizing, right?
Right.
So it was just a good Atmos mix and it was just bounced to stereo, right?
Sure.
So I don't find that to be incredible as of yet, and I think it needs quite a bit of a refinement to go into stereo properly. Maybe you do need a separate session and you need to work.
That's a
can
tough
find
one.
a bit of a mid-range mud coming in, and I think particularly because of the reverbs as well. And the panna,
possibly,
when it places it EQs things and may be impacting it. So it needs some work to come down to stereo properly.
Yeah, look, I've done a little bit of work that way where we're just basically building the mix from scratch. There is no stereo mix. We're just doing the Atmos one, and then the stereo re-render is going to be the stereo version. And that process does take a little bit more to make sure that the stereo down mix works. But look, in my experience so far, I've been pretty lucky, I guess, that it does seem to translate pretty well. And I've found that the stereo mix rendered down from Atmos is actually better, or can be better than if you mix it in stereo. And I liken that often to how if you're shooting a video, if you're shooting a video in 1080 and exporting 1080, then it's gonna look 1080, cool. But then if you shoot in 4K and then export 1080, right? So even though the deliverable, the output is the same 1080, but you're shooting from a higher, resolution on the way in, that translates and sticks around. So it still looks better, even though the output is the same. So I guess in the same sense, we've got Atmos and stereo, and they're both going to end up stereo, but the Atmos one still wins, right? That's how I've sort of thought of it.
Cool.
But it does take a bit more work to get there for sure.
For sure.
And I think, those reverbs, I need to do more work into that, exactly, because I haven't used too many immersive reverbs just yet. Still working on it, but I do a lot of things where I'm using like stereo reverbs, and I'll go the two sides, and that's like a stereo, and then I'll do another one for the rear, and so it still kind of works, but it's not fully expansive in the way you're talking about with the immersive qualities all at once, but I've kind of built it, other ways to achieve that. But look, it's all very fascinating. Is there?
I love it. Yeah.
Is there anything else, in mixing Atmos that you found was completely different to how you work in stereo?
I guess bussing and gain staging, I got better with that. So when I first approached an Atmos mix, I obviously didn't have experience, and all of my channels were routed through buses, sub-buses, more buses. Every bus had some gain staging, compressor, doing things. You can't do it in Atmos. I mean, you sort of can, but if you want to avoid a messy mix, you avoid that.
Yeah, it's already complicated enough, right?
And so lately, I have been more successful with that when so my session was routed as just single tracks in folders. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we have kick, I have printed all the processing that I've had. Maybe in this case, I did a more raw kind of production where I dialed in tones better, but I didn't apply much processing anymore.
Right.
That helped to translate better, actually. I didn't need to compress those buses, didn't need to do as much. So just buses and the different approach to lack of bus compression can throw a mixer off if they're used to top-down approach. Because we were told that top-down approach is a cool way to save time, get the color, especially if you use analog equipment. I stopped using my analog equipment in my Atmos production now as well. I mean, I can do that and print things, but I used to have, this is my mix bus parallel crush, and it will go to the rear or to the sides. Don't really need that. It doesn't apparently add as much as I thought it would. At least it adds in the stereo. Because in stereo, all the parallel smash thing is so flat that it helps things to cut through in a dense mix. But you don't need that in Atmos.
Well,
and it just becomes a bit more muddy.
Yeah.
So
well, there are ways to do that, though. Like the one way that I've done that was to basically grab, it's kind of like a weird bus processing thing, but I would grab, so the entire bed and then parallel another 10 tracks for it. So essentially it's like compressing to death just the bed, right?
Yes.
And as a parallel. And then you have a bit more front heavy stuff, and it tends to be a bit more energy, but it's not really needed. Again, like you said, it's punchy enough because you have so many speakers, particularly with the sub as well, that is acting as an LFE rather than just the low end of everything.
That was a big thing,
Yeah, so you can do things with more control anyway, which just does have more impact, I think.
So I guess my conclusion here would be that Atmos mix works better when you treat it in a simple way, because it is complicated enough and you have so many ways around it. Like in stereo, you do have quite a few ways, but in Atmos, on top of that, you have objects, or you have beds, you have bed objects, you can group them, all of that stuff, which can be so confusing. I don't do that. Like if I mix just a bed and objects and that's it. But these days I could probably get away with just objects, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
I feel like the way to orchestrate this chaos, the way to orchestrate these complexities to keep it as simple as you can. And that gave the best results, really, so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's also where you're comfortable at as well. Like, don't be afraid to try new things, but if it works,
absolutely,
then just do that. Like, exactly, if it ain't broke, I guess. There's so many ways to achieve great results with this stuff, and it is so forgiving because it's so fresh, and there's really no rules with Atmos yet. A few, but not really. And like it's kind of cool just to explore, So I think the other thing I was going to say with the object-based beds stuff, that's a really interesting one. It comes up quite a bit. Everyone talks about that. Who's started in Atmos. For films, I treat it a little bit differently than I do music, and that's mainly because I have to have separate things anyway. Like everything, I've got the M&E and the dialogue, all these different parts that have to be separate deliverables. So it's pretty important to have that. With music, though, I do a lot of stuff in the bed, but then I will have an object-based bed as well that I'm really just using for like kind of upmixing or reverbs. So essentially, there is always something in every speaker, so to speak, sometimes, right?
I understand, to fill it in.
Yeah, it's just kind of, exactly. And it feels like I'm not wasting anything. But then you still want dynamics. Sometimes you want, nothing, so that when something happens, it's more impactful. Like there's so many ways to do it. But particularly, when it's like the chorus, then I'll try and fill that out. And I'll use objects to do that. So it ends up looking like basically, you've got an object in every placement that there is a speaker in your little cube renderer thing. And you sort of see that, so I'm mixing in 914 primarily. And, in my setup, that just means you've got 5 across the front, really, 2 sides, 2 rears. And then, 2 front tops, 2 rear tops. And, not to say you can't do more than that, because remember, when you extrapolate up to bigger systems, again, particularly for a film, then, you're going to have more speakers to put those in. But even in the lower formats, I like to separate them even further. So I'll have maybe 6 or 8 different positions in the tops. And you feel that even in lower formats. So even in 9.1 or 914, I can hear the difference between front left all the way and front left a little bit out. That I can hear that because it's using both of the 2 speakers I have for front and rear of the left side to approximate where that is. So I still feel that immersion of, placing it like that. So that's why I use object-based beds, because you can do that. In a bed, you've only got all left top, all right top, and the prefixed, positions of where the speakers actually are. But if you want that extra separation, it is really quite helpful to do that. So try it more if you feel like you want to. Like, it's quite a fun experiment. But
cool. Well, that's where physics come into play.
Oh yeah.
This is
I mean,
quite
Atmos is still pretty good at like fixing those anomalies. Like when you are placing things like that, you got to worry about phase a bit more still.
But
Atmos has fixed a lot of that. So I don't feel like there's too much wrong, unless your room's not calibrated correctly. But it's like, most of the time, like, you're pretty spot on.
Yeah.
So okay, we've got 10 minutes left. I am going to look. Is there anything particularly that you're working on at the moment that you'd like to share with the audience? What's next for you?
I mean, I did finish that song in Atmos, and I would love to share it, but I haven't released it at all. No one has heard it yet, and I don't even know, like, haven't developed anything about it. So it's all in the dark, because it may be a movie soundtrack. I'm gonna work on a movie score, which is a bit secret right now. Hopefully it's gonna go good. The short film, drama. That's all I'm gonna say, and that may turn into a soundtrack. So I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to share it. So I don't know. I wish I could, but to be honest, the problem with things that I do sometimes, it's I lack full direction. I just go into the creative flow and I finish it, and then like, oh, what do I do next?
Yeah,
so sometimes it's just there is so much going on. So I would love to, but I'm not sure if I can.
That's okay.
Otherwise, I think Victory is a good track that represents what we have done together with you.
Definitely. Yeah, no, well, I'll put that one back in. So that'll Victory was a fun one to show. Is there anything else? I think there was another track, wasn't there? There's another one you sent me. That
I must have sent it some time ago. I can't remember whether we have mixed it or not.
I'm not sure if I finished it, but I'm pretty sure you sent me 2 tracks. So if I can find that, maybe I'll chuck that on as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I mean, the only other thing I think I wanted to touch on was, so the scoring thing. So if people want to, hire you as a composer, why might you be the right fit, and how do they get in contact with you?
Right. So I would say that I'm a very, very niche composer, and that is a good thing and a bad thing. So it would definitely instantly turn off people who want a fun or subtle, like funny kind of score, comedy, like not my thing. Not at all.
Fair enough.
I'm a very directed composer who works in epic, dark, maybe uplifting, cinematic kind of music, which fits for an action, drama, thriller, or horror. That's it. I only do those things. I only do that because this is my thing that I feel. And I have my classical background combined with heavy music background. So those elements come into play. You think Hans Zimmer, you think Mick Gordon, that kind of thing, but my unique kind of spin, a bit more nostalgic maybe. That's where I shine the best, and that's where I can help movie people do the best. My website is customcinematicsongwriting.com. So if you go there will be a portfolio, there will be some short films I worked on, and you can get in touch there, or you can just follow my Instagram, which is Dr. Mike Metal with underscores, and you can find me there.
Beautiful.
That's it. I'm keen to give as much value as I can, and that's one of the things that I, position myself for. I absolutely do not take projects where I don't feel like I am the best fit, and the projects that I do take on are sort of more niche, but they're more aimed to epic, big kind of scores, which are good. It's a good thing. It's just I'm not at Hollywood level yet, though.
That's right. Well, I mean, look, I guess from Victory, these guys have heard it now. That's kind of a taste of the kind of thing that you're going for there, and that's very exciting.
Totally.
So you guys, if anyone needs some epic, guitar heavy or full on scores, give Mike a bell. Just for your other stuff as well, if you want to give that a quick plug, because you do mixing and recording and all those things as well. Totally. So where can they find you for that?
All of that, just go onto my Instagram. You can find that. Have a YouTube where I share information like about recording processes, some advices, some Atmos stuff as well. I've done a couple of videos about that. Yep. So all of that you can find through my Instagram, through my link tree, and go from there.
Awesome. Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're nearly at the end here, so I better
Thank
jump
you so
off,
much for having me. That was a blast.
No problem. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun, man. And Dolby Atmos is something that we were both obviously very passionate about. And this
very passionate.
Thing about
I'm
immersion.
so keen to have more of that.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll talk more definitely about it. But you guys, if anyone has any questions or anything like that about Dolby Atmos, come talk to Mike or myself about all of that fun stuff. And then we'll try and keep you more updated. With this podcast is one way we're trying to do that, but always up for a chat as well with people. So anyway, thanks again for coming on, man. I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
No worries, dude. See you later. Thanks for listening to Beyond Stereo, the Dolby Atmos podcast. If you like what you heard, check out some of our other episodes available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, and YouTube. And be sure to look out for more exciting guests very, very soon. See you there.